The forest was silent, except for the sound of rain falling through the broken trees. A human soldier named Daniel pulled himself out of the wreckage of his crashed ship. His uniform torn and his body covered in bruises, he looked around the strange world, smoke rising in the distance where his ship had burned. The air was heavy, the sky dark, and he felt completely alone, but he was not alone. From the shadows of the ruined village nearby, two glowing eyes watched him carefully. A small alien girl, thin and shaken, crouched behind a fallen wall. She had been hiding ever since the raiders destroyed her home, and now she saw something even worse, one of the creatures she had been told about all her life. A human. Her people whispered that humans were monsters from far-off stars. Ruthless and dangerous, she pressed her small hands against her chest, her heart beating fast, wondering if she should run or stay hidden. Daniel moved slowly, his boots sinking into the mud. He was searching for shelter, food, or maybe just a reason to keep moving. He carried a small ration pack from his belt, opening it with trembling fingers. The smell of food spread in the air, and the alien girl felt her stomach twist painfully. She had not eaten in 2 days, but fear was stronger than hunger. Then he spoke, his voice rough but calm. "I know you're there." The alien girl froze, her body stiff. Daniel did not move closer. He only placed the food on a stone and stepped back. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, his tone soft but tired. "If you're hungry, take it." The girl's eyes widened, her sharp ears twitching at the strange sound of his language. Somehow she understood enough. He was offering her food, not violence. Minutes passed like hours. The rain dripped from her tangled hair as she stared at the small pack of food. Her stomach growled loudly, and Daniel heard it. He gave a faint smile, though his lips were cracked. "Go on, it's yours." She took one slow step forward, her body trembling. Her feet pressed into the wet ground, as if even the earth itself wanted to hold her back. She reached out her thin hand, her long fingers brushing against the package, but suddenly she pulled back, whispering to herself, "No. If I trust him, they will call me traitor." Daniel tilted his head, hearing the fear in her voice, though he could not understand her words. Still, he stayed calm, showing no sign of anger or impatience. He sat down on a fallen log, placing his weapon far from his reach so she could see he would not attack. He looked up at the gray sky and sighed, whispering, "I don't want to fight anymore." The girl blinked, confused. This was not how she imagined a monster. This human was tired, hurt, and alone. She crept closer, step by shaky step, her eyes never leaving his face. Every story she had heard said humans had red eyes, sharp teeth, and cruel smiles, but this one had tired blue eyes, filled not with cruelty but with pain. He saw her moving and stayed still, afraid that one wrong motion would send her running. Finally, she stopped just an arm's length away, the food between them. Her hands shook as she reached for it again. This time she grabbed it and pulled it close, clutching it to her chest like a treasure. Her lips parted as if to speak, but only a small sound escaped. Her eyes darted to his weapon lying far away, then back to his calm face. Slowly, she sat on the ground across from him. She opened the package with trembling fingers and sniffed the food. It smelled strange, but warm. She took a small bite, her eyes narrowing, ready to spit it out if it was poison. But instead, her mouth filled with a taste she had almost forgotten: safety, warmth, and life. Tears stung her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away, refusing to show weakness. Daniel leaned back, letting her eat without pressure. For the first time since the crash, he felt less alone. Maybe he did not understand her language. Maybe she feared him, but she was still here. The rain continued to fall, washing the dirt and blood from his face. The girl finished the food quickly, then licked her fingers carefully, as if not to waste a single crumb. She looked at him again, her fear still strong, but mixed now with something else: curiosity. Why would a human, a supposed monster, give her food and ask for nothing? Night was falling. the forest filling with strange sounds. The girl pulled her knees to her chest, her eyes wide as the darkness thickened. Daniel looked at her trembling form, and then at the small fire he had managed to build with wet wood. He pushed the fire a little closer to her side. "Careful not to frighten her. You'll freeze without warmth," he said softly, even if she could not understand. She glanced at the fire, then at him. Torn between fear and need, in the end, she edged a little closer, still keeping distance, but no longer hiding in the shadows. Her glowing eyes reflected the flames as she whispered to herself, Maybe he is not like the stories." Daniel closed his eyes, exhaustion pulling at him. But he allowed himself one small thought of hope. Perhaps this strange, frightened girl was the reason he had survived the crash. Perhaps he was not meant to face this world alone. The night grew darker, and the sound of the storm faded into the distance. The human soldier and the alien girl, both broken and afraid, sat by the same fire. Neither fully trusted the other, but both knew they needed one another to survive. And so began the first fragile thread of trust, woven in silence, fear, and flickering firelight. The next morning, the forest was quiet, mist rising from the wet ground. Daniel opened his tired eyes, every muscle in his body aching from the crash. For a moment, he thought he was still alone. But then he saw her. The small alien girl sat a few steps away, knees pulled close to her chest, staring at him with unblinking eyes. She had not run. That meant something. Daniel gave her a small nod. Careful not to move too fast. She flinched anyway, her thin hands gripping the edge of the broken wall beside her. The fire between them was only faint smoke now, but it had kept them alive through the night. Daniel reached for the ration pack at his belt, pulling out another piece of food. This time he placed it in the middle, not closer to her, not closer to him, a silent offer. A line of trust drawn in the mud. The girl's stomach growled, but she shook her head. Her eyes narrowed, as if to say, "What do you want in return?" Daniel sighed, whispering under his breath, "Nothing." He leaned back, showing his empty hands. He could feel her suspicion like a knife, but he also saw the hunger that ate at her from the inside. Minutes passed, then finally she crawled forward and grabbed the food. But before eating, she looked at him carefully, as if trying to see the trap hidden behind his tired face. A branch cracked in the forest, and suddenly everything changed. The girl gasped, her ears twitching, her whole body stiff. Daniel reached for his weapon, out of instinct, his heart beating faster. From the trees, two shadowy beasts stepped out, their eyes glowing with hunger. They were long and lean, with sharp teeth and tails that whipped behind them like whips. The girl froze, terror gripping her body. Daniel stood in front of her, raising his strange human weapon. The creatures growled, stepping closer, ready to pounce. A flash of light cut the air, a loud crack of energy echoing through the forest. One beast fell instantly, the other snarled and ran, disappearing into the shadows. Smoke curled from the barrel of Daniel's weapon. The girl's eyes widened in shock. This was the power of a human. She had seen her people fight these beasts before many had died, but this man killed one in a single strike. Her fear grew, yet at the same time something inside her shifted. He had protected her, not himself. He had placed his body between danger and her small form. Daniel lowered his weapon and glanced back at her. "You're safe," he said softly, though she probably did not understand the words. Still, his expression carried the meaning. The girl's trembling eased a little, though her eyes never left the fallen beast. Why would a human protect her? Why not let her be taken so he could escape? She hugged the food to her chest, confused and frightened. But now, a new thought whispered in her heart. Perhaps he was not her enemy. The rest of the day passed in silence. Daniel searched for dry wood and managed to start another fire. The girl followed him at a distance, her bare feet light against the forest floor. Every time he turned, she hid, but she never went far. At night, She did not disappear into the ruins, as she had planned. Instead, she sat nearby, her eyes glowing faintly as she kept watch. When Daniel closed his eyes to rest, he wondered if maybe she was guarding him in her own way. But her doubts still chained her heart. As she sat in the shadows, she whispered to herself, "Why, human, why, help me?" Her people had always said humans were selfish, cruel, and greedy, yet this one gave food, shared fire, and risked his life for her. She could not understand, and not knowing scared her even more. Near dawn, a soft sound made her ears twitch again. She turned quickly and saw him. Daniel had shifted in his sleep, his face pale, a dark stain spreading on his side. Blood. Her eyes widened, realizing he had been wounded in the crash. He had protected her from the beast while already bleeding. She stood frozen, unsure what to do. Her small hands shook, her heart pounding. If she left him, he might die. But if she stayed, her people would call her weak for helping a monster. Daniel opened his eyes weakly, catching her staring at him. His lips curved into a faint smile, even as pain twisted his features. "You're safe," he whispered again, the same words as before. Then, his head fell back, his breathing shallow. The girl pressed her hand to her mouth, shaken to her core. She did not know his language fully, but she knew those words now. He was telling her, even while bleeding, that her safety mattered more than his own. The fire cracked softly, the forest waking with strange calls. The girl looked at the sleeping human, her fear now tangled with something else, curiosity, doubt, and a fragile thread of trust. She whispered to herself, maybe he is not a monster." Her voice trembled, but the words were real. As dawn broke over the ruined village, the alien girl sat beside the human soldier. Her fear had not vanished, but she no longer thought of running. For the first time in her life, she felt safer near a human than alone. And in that moment, without even realizing it, the first fragile bond of trust was formed. The storm arrived without warning. Dark clouds rolled across the sky, and rain poured down like endless sheets of glass. Daniel dragged branches into the mouth of a cave, trying to block the wind. His uniform was soaked, his wound stung with every move, but he kept working. He knew if they stayed outside, they would both freeze before the night was over. The alien girl stood at the edge of the cave, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. She shivered violently, her thin frame not built for the cold. Her wide glowing eyes followed every motion Daniel made. She still feared him, but the fire he built drew her closer with every spark. When he struck stone against steel, the crack of sparks lit her face, her breath caught in wonder. Fire was rare in her tribe. It was sacred, dangerous, and powerful, and here this human created it as easily as breathing. The flames finally caught, spreading across the damp wood until a steady fire flickered. Warmth filled the small cave, smoke curling toward the stone ceiling. Daniel leaned back against the wall, exhausted. He placed another ration pack near the fire, pushing it gently toward her. The girl stayed frozen at the entrance, shaking from cold and fear. The rain outside turned to a violent storm, thunder shaking the ground. She gasped and stepped inside quickly, but kept her distance. Her small feet pressed into the dirt floor, leaving prints like those of a frightened animal. Daniel did not force her. He simply gestured toward the food, his movements slow and calm. Then he leaned against the wall, closing his eyes as if he no longer cared whether she came near or not. The girl's chest rose and fell quickly, her breath fast, her heart racing. She looked at the human, then at the fire, then at the food. Her hunger won again. She crawled forward, snatched the ration, and retreated back to the wall. Daniel opened one eye and gave a faint smile before letting it close again. It was not a smile of victory, but of relief. For him, her trust, even a tiny piece of it, was worth more than any treasure. The night stretched on, the storm growing worse. The wind howled through the forest outside, and water dripped steadily from cracks in the cave ceiling. The fire hissed and popped, fighting against the wet wood. The girl sat hugging her knees, staring at the flames. Her body still trembled, not only from the cold, but from the fear curling in her heart. Every time Daniel shifted in his sleep, she tensed. Every sound of thunder made her flinch. At last, lightning struck so close that the ground shook beneath them. The girl cried out softly, her small hands clutching her chest. The fire wavered, almost dying out, and she scrambled closer to it in panic. Her body was so near to Daniel now that she could feel the warmth radiating from him as much as from the flames. He opened his eyes slowly, meeting her gaze. She froze, like prey caught by a predator, but instead of moving, instead of reaching for her, he only whispered, "It's all right." His voice was rough but calm, steady like the fire itself. Hours passed. The storm outside raged, but inside the cave was a fragile pocket of warmth. The girl's eyelids grew heavy, though she fought to keep them open. She leaned her head against the stone wall, but every crash of thunder jolted her awake. Finally, without realizing, she shifted closer and closer to Daniel. Her small shoulder brushed against his arm. She froze again, expecting anger or punishment, but Daniel did not move. He simply breathed, his chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. Her body relaxed against him, the warmth of another being stronger than her fear. Slowly, her head tilted, until it rested on his arm. Her breathing evened, and at last, sleep claimed her. Daniel looked down at her fragile form resting against him. His blue eyes softened, though he said nothing. He knew the fear she carried, the scars of her people's stories, but in that moment she had chosen to trust him, even if only in sleep. He let out a long breath and closed his eyes, allowing the storm to fade into the distance. When dawn came, pale light spilling into the cave. The storm was gone. The girl stirred, blinking awake. Her eyes widened as she realized her head rested against the human's arm. She pulled away quickly, her cheeks burning with shame and panic. Her small hands trembled as she whispered, "No, no, I should not." Daniel only stretched, wincing from his wound. He gave her a faint smile and said, "You must have been tired." The girl stared at him in shock. He was not angry. He was not mocking her. He simply accepted it as natural. Confusion filled her. Why was he not like the stories? Why did he not demand something in return? Why did he simply give and protect and allow her to rest without fear? She lowered her gaze, her heart heavy with questions she could not answer. The fire crackled gently, filling the silence with its warmth. Outside, the forest glistened with raindrops, fresh and alive after the storm. Inside, two unlikely souls sat close, not yet friends, not yet family, but no longer strangers separated by fear. The thread of trust between them grew stronger, fragile but real, and though neither spoke it aloud, both knew something had changed in the night, for she had leaned against the monster she once feared and found safety instead. The forest was alive with whispers that morning. Birds shrieked and then fell silent, as if warning that something darker had entered their world. Daniel walked carefully through the trees, each step slow because of his wound. The alien girl followed behind him, her glowing eyes scanning every shadow. She had stopped running from him, but fear had not left her. Only now, her fear was not only of the human, it was of something else. In the forest, she had seen signs before, tracks in the mud that did not belong to beasts. Strange symbols carved into trees, the kind her people feared. Raiders, they were near. Hunting survivors, hunting her, and now they might hunt him too. Her lips trembled as she whispered words in her own tongue. Daniel could not understand, but he understood her tone. It was warning. It was danger. He touched his weapon and gave a short nod. The girl pointed toward the deeper woods, her small hand shaking. Daniel studied her expressions. She was terrified, yet she stayed close. That alone told him enough. If she, who had feared him so greatly, chose his side now, then whatever was out there must be worse. As they moved through the forest, Daniel stopped suddenly. He crouched low and lifted his hand to signal silence. The girl froze, following his eyes. Through the trees they saw movement, dark figures, tall and armored, carrying long blades and shock spears. The raiders, their voices carried on the wind, harsh and cruel. They laughed as they searched, speaking of catching survivors, speaking of blood. The girl's body shook violently, her hands clutching at the fabric near her chest. Daniel's jaw tightened, his breath slow but steady. He guided her down to the ground. Hiding behind roots and moss, his hand rested on his weapon. But he did not fire, not yet. There were too many, and his wounds still ached. One mistake, and they would both die. The raiders passed close, their armor glinting in the sunlight. One stopped, sniffing the air like a beast. The girl's heart pounded so loud she feared they would hear it. Daniel placed a steadying hand on the ground between them, grounding her panic. The raider turned, eyes narrowing, but then another called, and they moved on. Their heavy steps shook the forest floor, until their voices faded into the distance. Only then did the girl breathe again, collapsing against the roots, her eyes filled with tears of both terror and relief. Daniel lowered his weapon slowly, his muscles still tense. He whispered softly, "They're hunting us," though he knew she could not understand. Still, she seemed to know the meaning. Her silence, her trembling, said everything. That night they did not rest in the cave. Instead, Daniel led her to a ridge above the forest, where the air was clear, and the ground gave a view of the land below. He set small traps with wire and shards of metal, simple defenses he had learned long ago. The girl watched him work, her head tilted. She had never seen such things, never seen a human prepare with such patience. It was strange to her. He was powerful with his weapon, but also clever with his hands, for the first time. She looked at him not with fear, but with something like wonder. When the fire was lit, she sat closer than before. Her glowing eyes reflected the flames as she whispered softly. He could not understand her words, but he could hear the tone. She was asking, perhaps, why he fought, why he cared. Daniel stared into the fire, remembering faces long gone, voices that haunted his dreams. He did not answer, but the pain in his eyes was enough. The girl fell silent, realizing that this human too carried scars, not on his skin, but deep in his soul. The forest grew quiet, too quiet. Daniel's instincts sharpened, his eyes narrowing. He placed a finger to his lips and pointed to the edge of the trees. The girl turned, her heart leaping. A shadow moved, silent and careful, not a beast, not a bird, but something that walked like a man. Her blood ran cold. The raiders had found their trail. Daniel gripped his weapon, his breath calm, though his wound ached. The girl crawled closer to him, fear wide in her eyes. Her lips formed silent words, begging him not to fight, not to die. But Daniel gave a faint, grim smile. He whispered, "It's all right," the same words he had spoken before. The girl's chest tightened. Why did those words, spoken in a tongue she barely understood, calm her heart so deeply? The shadow moved again, closer now. Daniel aimed his weapon, finger steady on the trigger. The girl held her breath, her hands clutching her knees. Then silence. Only the crackle of the fire remained. But both of them knew this was only the beginning. The raiders were watching, and sooner or later, they would come. The girl turned to Daniel, her voice trembling. "They will kill us both." Though he could not understand, he saw the truth in her eyes. He nodded slowly, not in fear, but in resolve. She realized then something terrifying and comforting at once. This human was not running, he was preparing, and if the raiders came, he would not let them take her. The night fell heavy across the forest. Shadows stretched long, and the only light came from a pale moon breaking through the clouds. Daniel sat awake, weapon in hand, listening to the faintest sounds around their camp. The alien girl slept curled near the fire, her small breaths steady, her body finally at peace. For a moment, he allowed himself to believe they were safe. But the silence broke. A branch snapped, then another. Figures slipped from the trees, like ghost raiders. Their blades glimmered in the moonlight, their voices low and cruel. Daniel rose quickly, but before he could fire, a sharp strike from behind knocked him to the ground. His weapon slid from his hands, landing far from reach. The girl awoke to shouts, her glowing eyes wide with terror. Hands grabbed her, pulling her from the firelight. She screamed, her small voice echoing in the night. Daniel struggled against the weight pressing him down. Fists and boots struck him, but he pushed back with all the strength he had left. Blood dripped from his side. His vision blurred, but his mind was sharp. He had only one thought. Don't let them take her. The raiders dragged the girl into the clearing. She kicked and clawed, but their armor was thick, their grip unbreakable. One raider laughed, holding her high as if she were nothing. She betrayed her kind for a human, he sneered, his voice cruel. She will learn the price. The girls. Tears burned her cheeks. She shouted words in her tongue, her voice full of defiance, even through fear. Daniel, barely able to stand, pushed himself from the ground. He stumbled, then steadied, his fists clenched. The raiders turned toward him, amused by his struggle. This human is weak, one growled, but Daniel's eyes held fire. With a sudden burst he lunged forward, slamming into the raider holding her. The impact knocked the alien back, the girl falling free into the dirt. Daniel grabbed her hand, pulling her behind him. His voice was low, but fierce. Run, but she froze, staring at him as the raiders circled. There was no escape, not without him. The battle began. Daniel fought with bare hands, fists striking armor, knees breaking bone. He moved with the rage of a man who had nothing left to lose. Each blow cost him blood, but he did not stop. The girl watched in horror and awe as he fought against 3, then 4. Every strike he took only made him stand taller. Her heart screamed in her chest. Why does he fight so hard for me? One raider slashed his side, blood spilling across the ground. Daniel staggered, his breath ragged, but still, he swung. The girl's hands shook violently, her tears falling. She could not bear it anymore. She cried out in her language, her voice breaking, "Don't die. Please, don't die." The raiders laughed, mocking her desperation. One raised his blade high to end the human once and for all. But Daniel roared, pushing forward. He slammed his shoulder into the raider, knocking him to the ground. Pain exploded through his wound, but he ignored it. His vision blurred, his knees weakened. Still he stood, his body a wall between the girl and death. At last his strength faltered. He fell to one knee, blood dripping into the dirt. The raiders grinned, ready to finish him. The girl's breath caught, her heart shattering. She could not let it end this way. She dove toward the fallen weapon in the grass's weapon. Her small hands wrapped around the heavy grip, trembling. The raiders paused, surprised at her defiance. She raised it, though it shook in her hands. Her glowing eyes burned with fury. "Stay away," she screamed, though her voice cracked. Daniel looked back at her, his lips curling into the faintest smile even as blood stained his face. His eyes said what his voice could not too, "Are braver than you know." The raider snarled, stepping closer. The girl's hand steadied, her finger brushing the trigger. The memory of how he used it flashed in her mind, the sound, the light, the power. She aimed with all her strength. The weapon roared, the light splitting the night. One raider fell, smoke curling from his chest. The others growled in anger, rushing forward. Daniel, with the last of his strength, rose to meet them. Together, the human and the alien girl fought, one with fists, one with trembling hands clutching fire. The night became chaos, filled with shouts, blood, and flame. At last, the remaining raiders stumbled back, dragging their wounded. Their leader spat into the dirt, glaring at Daniel. "This is not over, human," he hissed, before retreating into the forest shadows. Silence returned, broken only by the crackle of the dying fire. The girl dropped the weapon, her body shaking violently. She rushed to Daniel's side, falling to her knees beside him. He collapsed into the dirt, his breath shallow, his lips pale. "No," she whispered, tears pouring down her face. "You can't leave me." Daniel's weak hand reached for hers. He pressed her small fingers with the last of his strength. "Run. Don't let them take you," he whispered, his voice fading. The girl shook her head fiercely, her tears falling onto his chest. "I won't run," she cried. "Not without you." And for the first time, she held him close, not in fear, but in desperate need. Her small body shielded his broken one as the night closed in. She realized then the truth she had tried to deny. She was no longer afraid of him. She was afraid of losing him. The forest was still after the battle. The smell of smoke and blood hung in the air. Daniel lay on the ground, his breaths shallow, his body broken. The alien girl knelt beside him, her trembling hands pressed to his chest as if she could hold his life inside. Tears streaked her face, dripping onto his uniform. She whispered in her tongue, desperate words he could not understand. But her voice carried one truth: she would not leave him. Around them the world was silent, but she knew the raiders were not gone. They would return, stronger, angrier. If she ran now, she might escape. But Daniel would die here, alone in the dirt. Her heart screamed with the same choice again and again. Her people would call her foolish for staying. They would call her traitor for fighting beside a human. But her soul whispered something else. Without him, she would be nothing. Daniel coughed, his lips stained with blood, his hand lifted weakly, pressing against hers. His voice was soft, broken. "Run. Please." She shook her head, her eyes glowing fiercely. "No?" She whispered in her own tongue, "I will not run." He didn't understand, but her defiance was clear. Her tears mixed with rain on his skin as she cried, "You saved me. Now I will save you." She stood, wiping her face with the back of her hand. Her small body shook, but her eyes burned with new fire. The human weapon still lay nearby, heavy and strange. She picked it up again, her arms straining under the weight. Her hands were raw from gripping it before, but she did not let go. She walked to the edge of the campfire, staring into the forest. If the raiders returned, they would not find her as prey. They would find her as his shield. Time passed slowly, every shadow in the trees filling her with dread. Daniel drifted in and out of sleep, his face pale. Sometimes he whispered words she did not understand. Names, memories, fragments of pain. She sat beside him, whispering back softly, promising in her language that he would not die alone, even if he did not hear her. She hoped her voice carried into his dreams. Then, footsteps. The girl's ears twitched. Her heart froze. She crouched low, gripping the weapon tightly. Dark shapes moved between the trees. The raiders had returned. They were fewer this time, but they were cautious. Their leader hissed, his voice sharp, "The human bleeds. The girl is weak. Finish it." The girl's breath shook, but she did not back away. She stepped in front of Daniel's broken form. Her glowing eyes shone like fire as she aimed the weapon. The raiders laughed cruelly, their blades flashing. Pathetic, one sneered, "She thinks she is warrior." But the leader's face changed as he saw her stance. This was no longer the trembling child they had mocked. This was someone who had chosen. They lunged forward. The girl screamed, pulling the trigger. The weapon roared, light tearing the night apart. One raider fell. Another stumbled. She fired again, though her arms shook violently with the recoil. Daniel, half conscious, opened his eyes. Through his blurred vision he saw her standing, fierce and unbroken, his lips curved into the faintest smile, pride flickering even in his pain. The raiders hesitated, surprised by her fury, but numbers still favored them. They pressed forward. The girl cried out, swinging the weapon wildly. One raider reached her, blade raised, before it could strike. Daniel forced himself up, his body screaming in protest. He grabbed the raider from behind, dragging him down with raw strength. The girl's eyes widened. He was fighting again, even half dead. Together, Side by side, they struggled against the last of their enemies. At last, the raiders broke. Dragging their wounded into the trees, the leader spat into the dirt again, his voice low and hateful. "This will not end, girl. The human will die, and so will you." Then they vanished into the night, their shadows swallowed by the forest. The girl dropped the weapon, her body collapsing to her knees, her chest heaved, tears streaming down her cheeks. She turned to Daniel, crawling to his side, his body slumped, his breaths ragged, but his eyes were still open, looking at her with quiet wonder. "You fought," he whispered weakly. She nodded, pressing her forehead against his chest. "Yes," she whispered in her language. "For you." Her small hands gripped his torn uniform, refusing to let go. She had chosen, not her people, not her fear, not survival alone. She had chosen him, even if it meant death, even if it meant betrayal of everything she had been told. She would not leave him. She would not let the raiders take him. The night grew quiet again, only the sound of the fire crackling beside them. Daniel's head rested against her shoulder as she held him. Her eyes stared into the flames, her voice soft but certain. "From this night forward, I am yours." He did not understand the words, but he felt the meaning, her warmth, her closeness, her strength, keeping him alive. And though pain still consumed him, for the first time since the crash, he felt safe, because she had chosen not to run. She had chosen him. Dawn broke slowly. Across the forest, golden light slipped between the trees, turning the wet leaves into mirrors of fire. Daniel stirred weakly, his body heavy with pain. The alien girl was still there, her small frame wrapped around him protectively, her eyes red from tears but burning with resolve. She had not slept, not even for a moment. When his eyes opened, she leaned closer, her voice trembling. "You are still here," she whispered. In her language, her tone full of relief. He did not understand her words, but her expression told him everything. He gave her a faint smile, though his lips were cracked. "Yes," he whispered, his voice no stronger than a breath. Her hands gripped as tightly as if holding him to the world, refusing to let him drift away. The forest was silent again, no sign of raiders. Only the soft call of distant birds, but both of them knew silence could not last forever. They needed safety, a place where he could heal. The girl stood, her legs weak, but her spirit unbroken. She slid his arm over her shoulder and pulled. Step by step, she dragged him through the forest, her small body carrying more weight than it should. Daniel groaned in pain, but she hushed him gently, whispering, "Be still. I will take you." Hours passed as she searched, until at last she found a hollow place hidden between cliffs. There was water nearby, and the cave smelled clean, untouched by raiders. She lowered him carefully to the ground, arranging him against the stone wall. Her hands shook as she tore strips from her own clothes to press against his wounds. He watched her quietly, his blue eyes filled with something she had not seen before. Trust. The same trust she had given him, now returned. Days passed. The girl hunted small creatures, gathered roots and leaves she recognized. Each night she built the fire the way he had shown her. Each night she pressed close to his side, listening to his shallow breaths. And each morning she awoke to find him still alive. Her heart lifted with every sunrise. Slowly, his strength began to return. One evening, as the fire flickered low, Daniel shifted weakly and sat up with effort. The girl jumped in surprise, rushing to steady him. His voice was rough, but clear. "You stayed." The words broke something inside her. Her glowing eyes filled with tears as she nodded quickly. "Yes," she whispered, though he could not know the meaning. "I stayed. I will always stay." For the first time, he reached out and placed his hand gently on her head. Her breath caught, her body trembling. No one had ever touched her like that, with kindness, with warmth. It was not command. It was not fear. It was not ownership. It was simply care. She lowered her head, pressing against his hand as tears spilled freely. The nights grew warmer. The fire, no longer their only shield against the cold, The girl no longer sat far away, no longer stared at him with suspicion. Instead, she lay beside him, her small body curled against his. At first she kept a gap of space, but slowly that gap vanished. Her head rested on his chest, her ear pressed against the steady thump of his heart. It was a sound she had feared would fade forever, but now it beat strong beneath her. Each beat promised life. Each beat promised he was still here. Daniel stayed awake the first night she did this. His hand hovered uncertainly above her. He had lost so much: his ship, his mission, his people. But here, in the silence of a broken world, he had gained something he had never expected. Someone who trusted him completely. At last he let his hand rest gently across her back. She sighed softly in her sleep, her breathing deep and calm. He closed his eyes too. For the first time without fear, days turned into weeks. His wounds healed slowly under her care. She grew stronger, braver. No longer the trembling child who once hid from him. Together they built small defenses around the cave. Together they searched for food. When danger came, they faced it side by side. And when night fell, she always returned to her place on his chest. It became her home, the place where fear no longer lived. One night, under a sky filled with endless stars, the girl whispered softly. Her voice was so quiet, it was almost lost in the crackle of the fire. "Once, I thought humans were monsters," she admitted in her own tongue. "Now, I know only one thing: you are my safe place." Daniel did not know her words, but when she looked up at him with shining eyes, he understood. He smiled faintly, whispering his own truth. "You saved me too." The girl closed her eyes, resting again on his chest. Her body relaxed completely. Her small hands curled against him, as if afraid he might vanish. But he did not vanish. His heart beat steady, strong, like a drum guiding her dreams. She slept in peace. No longer the terrified child of the ruins. She was something else now. She was his protector, his family, his bond in a world that had taken everything. The forest outside remained wild. The raiders still lurked somewhere in the shadows, but inside that cave, in the warmth of the fire, nothing could touch them. The human and the alien girl, two broken souls who had found each other. No longer strangers, no longer enemies, safe at last, together.